Hello, and thank you for joining. Today I'm going to cover a couple of topics coming from the book of Samuel, First Samuel actually, chapter 8. And this gets into where the children of Israel was telling Samuel they wanted a king. And Yahweh was not enough. They wanted a king, they wanted a human king like the other nations. But what the Lord told them, this is what stood out to me. One thing in this chapter that stood out, how that king was going to um, cause them to give tithe or 10% of certain things he wanted. Now this was interesting. The reason why it stood out because you don't hear about a king requiring 10% from God's people, because that was specific to the Israelite tribe, right? So, the 12 tribes of Israel, well, the 11 tribes of Israel, well, actually 12, because all of them had to give us 10%. But of course, the 11 had to give 10% to the tribe of Levi, and the tribe of Levi had to give 10% of what they received from the 11 tribes to the Levitical priest, because they were not able to own property. The Levitical priests took care of God's temple. So that was how he blessed them to be able to have what they needed. But this other situation, though, in First Samuel chapter 8, this was not God's way. Okay? He made it clear. He told them what that king was going to require of them as far as the 10% requirement of their certain products or the things that belong to them. So this is a clear distinction between the Lord's laws and commandments and a king. So a king was not a priest. All right, let's make that clear. It's not a priest. So they were in charge because God allowed them to be in charge, because the Lord put them in place, because again, this is what the Israelites wanted, because they were already kings in the world, in different parts, of course, of the world. And because God had set the children of Israel aside so he could be their king, because his desire was to show the rest of the world what his kingdom looks like for his people. Okay? But they didn't want that. They wanted the kings of this world. So when you start following Jesus as a believer, for those of you who will follow Jesus because you're contemplating, this is what that looks like. If you decide that you don't want to do it God's way and the world looks better than the ways of God, this is the confusion, and this is the issues that unfortunately you fall victim to, because God's ways are definitely helpful. It's for our good. The ways of the world is not. There's a whole different situation. The world has its requirements. God has his requirements. But God's requirements are so that we can have a great outcome, versus the world's requirements that is really not in our best interest overall. So that's why the Lord made it clear for us not to be conformed to this world. Well, Apostle Paul, he made it clear, because he was speaking what God wanted him to speak when he said we should not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds. So in the book of Samuel, well, First Samuel rather, chapter 8, it says, as Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons to be judges over Israel, Joel and Abijah, or Abijah, however you feel like you can pronounce it. And it says his oldest sons held court in Beersheba, but they were not like their father, for they were greedy for money. They accepted bribes and perverted justice. Now, if you have read the beginning of Samuel, this is very familiar territory. Samuel, in that beginning of the chapter, the book, it talks about how he himself was young when Eli's sons were in charge, and how messy they were, right? So God raised up Samuel to let Eli know that he was going to address it. Well, confirm to Eli, because Eli was already told by another prophet what God was going to do. Then God used Samuel to confirm, what that prophet said, or reiterate to Eli what God said, because Eli did not chastise his sons. He did not set them down. He did not really correct them in the way that obviously the Lord wanted him to, and God brought judgment. So Samuel grows up pure before the Lord, but his sons did not choose to follow the Lord's way. Okay? And it says, but they were not like their father, for they were greedy for money. They accepted bribes and perverted justice. So verse 4 says, finally, all the elders of Israel met at Ramah to discuss the matter with Samuel. Look, they told him, you are now old, and your sons are not like you. Give us a king to judge us like all the other nations have. That's some bold stuff right there. They went straight in. They said, listen, let me tell you something, Samuel. We're not putting up with your boys. Okay, they're not like you. They wanted a king, of course. But Samuel was displeased, it says, with their request, and went to the Lord for guidance. Do everything they say to you, the Lord replied, for they are rejecting me, not you. They don't want me to be their king any longer. Ever since I brought them from Egypt, they have continually abandoned me and followed other gods. And now they are giving you the same treatment. Do as they ask, but solemnly warn them about the way a king will reign over them. So Samuel passed on the Lord's warning to the people who were asking for a king. This is how a king will reign over you, Samuel said. The king will draft your sons and assign them to his chariots and his charioteers, making them run before his chariots. Some will be generals and captains in his army. Some will be forced to plow in fields and harvest his crops. And some will make his weapons and chariot equipment. The king will take your daughters from you and force them to cook and bake and make perfumes for him. He will take away the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his own officials. He will take a tenth of your grain and your grape harvest and distribute it among his officers and attendants. Let me start right there. He is going to force them to tithe to him. Okay? This is not going to the Lord, to Yahweh, because Jesus had not come yet in the flesh. But it's not going to Yahweh. It's not about Yahweh. And what I mean when I say it's not going to Yahweh, it's not under the authority of Yahweh. This type of tithe is not under the authority of Yahweh. This was just despicable and was disrespectful, because this is not the way God intended for things to be. But the Lord was letting them know what was going to happen. It said again in verse 15, he will take a tenth of your grain and your grape harvest and distribute it among his officers and attendants. He will take your male and female slaves and demand the finest of your cattle and donkeys for his own use. He will demand a tenth of your flocks, and you will be his slaves. When that day comes, you will beg for relief from this king you are demanding, but then the Lord will not help you. But the people refused to listen to Samuel's warning. Even so, they said they still want a king. They said it. They want to be like the nations around them. Their king would judge them and lead them into battle. So Samuel repeated to the Lord what the people had said. And the Lord replied, do as they say and give them a king. Then Samuel agreed and sent the people home. Now, this is an excellent contrast of what's going on in our time, because we weren't there. But we can clearly see how this is so similar to what's going on in this world. Okay? Truly, we can see clearly what the world is doing versus what God has said. So, there's a God of this world, and there is the God who created the world. Okay? It's different. So the God who created this world is God over everything. However, when you decide you don't want to follow him, Yahweh, through Jesus Christ, Yeshua, then you're saying that you want to follow the God of this world, which comes with a certain responsibility, all right, which comes with certain demands. And Yahweh made it clear that his ways are easier. And his blessings are amazing for sure. That nothing can compare to. Okay? So I hope these words have found you well. And I ask that you please read this lesson and look at it for yourself. Don't just, go by what I'm saying and run with it and just feel like, okay, um, I'm giving you the tea. I want you to drink the tea for yourself. Okay? This is some good tea. You need to drink it for yourself and not just go by what I tell you or how good I tell you it is. This is a strong tea. It is life changing tea. It is for everyone, okay? Because the Lord has no respect to person. But we all have choice. Keep that in mind. And no one in this world has a right to force anyone to drink the tea. This is free will. We have free will to drink the tea of the Lord or not to. But if we drink the Lord's tea, it is much greater and tastes much better than the tea of this world. Well, I hope these words have found you well. And until the next time you sit with me, stay focused and enjoy your tea.